Hey, folks. We have New York, College Park, Maryland, Columbus, Ohio. I love Columbus. Audubon, Pennsylvania. I've never been to Audubon, Pennsylvania. I certainly know about James Audubon. Middleton, Mass. North Carolina. Boy, you got big things going on in North Carolina. I hope I get to come down there again soon. Berwyn, Illinois. Savannah, Georgia. Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, Southern Minnesota, Greenville, Michigan. And here is Facebook from Chiefland, Florida. I've never heard of Chiefland, Florida. Waltham, Massachusetts, the city of watches. You know what? I suppose I can't tell you the history of watches now because there's other stuff going on. But you know what? Maybe someday all this will close down, or you don't have to worry about politics all the time. And I will have a channel of cool stories from history. Anyway, I'll work toward that. Another Columbus, Ohio. I hope you guys know each other. All right, let me get into some of your questions, and then there's some stuff I wanted to talk about today too. Just so you know, it is hot, hot, hot here today. I may not even be coherent, but it's nice because I've missed all the hot days here this summer. It's the first time I've actually, been able to swim and stuff. So anyway. All right, some of the questions that are easy to knock off. Somebody asked about the tax cuts that are in the budget reconciliation bill, which nobody can seem to figure out what to call. They're still now going back to the one big beautiful bill, except now it's a law. So one big beautiful something, there's all these little acronyms. I keep calling it the budget reconciliation measure. And that's the one that the Republicans passed through the House and the Senate, and Trump signed into law on July 4th. And in it, there are a number of things, including the extraordinary cuts to Medicaid and to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and also the extension of the 2017 tax cuts under the first Trump administration. Those have been extended. And the language you're hearing is that the law has made those permanent. And somebody asked if that meant they could never be changed. No, it does not. It means that they do not have what we call a sunset clause in them. That is, they are not designed to end at a certain time the way the 2017 tax cuts were. They are designed to be there until the Congress changes them. And from my perspective, a Congress in the future is going to have to change them. So when we say permanent, that's all we mean, that they're not going to automatically expire. They are going to continue until a Congress changes them. So that's what they mean by that. I love this question. Was there ever a time when we had term limits for the Supreme Court of the United States? And the answer is what we had was horses and poor medical care. So the idea that you're going to stay in Congress that you're going to stay in the Supreme Court until you're carried out toes up is a really, really recent phenomenon. You can think of justices who've retired, and that used to be more common than not, because until, the late 20th century, first of all, there came a time when people didn't want to spend their lives still at work, and they would just retire. They would go on to do something else. But there was also a really important limit to early judgeships, and that's that quite literally members of the Supreme Court rode the circuit. That is, they had to be able to travel and they had to be able to ride around the circuit on a horse. And that's a young man's game. So a lot of people did not stay in those positions very long. That changes later on when they become more or less permanent in Washington. But for a long time, there wasn't even a Supreme Court building because they were riding around. So, you imagine Samuel Alito riding a horse around, it wasn't going to happen. So that was where we had term limits for the Supreme Court. Now, there are a number of ways we're going to have to be rebuilding this country. And one of the things we're going to have to do is rethink some of the things that were put in place at a time when you really didn't expect to live into your 80s, and you didn't really expect to be able to work on a national level really past your early 50s. Because it just changes the entire way the government works. There's just so much less turnover than we used to have from mortality and from frailness. So I liked that question because it let me talk about the circuits. All right. Another interesting question, and that is, when did gerrymandering, or the act of creating districts that strongly favor one political party or another become important in American history. And the concept, the idea of gerrymandering comes from Elbridge Gerry, spelled the same, pronounced differently. I don't know why. But if you this is such a piece of trivia, but if you're driving in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near the BB&N school there on the river, that road is actually Gary's Landing Road. It's short, but your GPS will tell you it's Gary's Landing, and I think there's a sign for it. That's Elbridge Gerry, for whom we got the name gerrymandering. He didn't like it because, and it was called gerrymandering because the district that his political party drew looked like a salamander. So it's a combination of Gary and salamander, so we get gerrymander. That there was so what you see from that is there was always this idea of wiggling a bit to try and get a district that favored your side versus another. But what computers have done is they have enabled this sort of surgical gerrymandering to either crack or pack are the two major ways that you gerrymander. To crack a population is to say, and I'm going to say, use this as, I will say Democrats and Republicans, you could say oranges and apples or whatever, but you either take your opponents and you crack them. So if they have a majority, you break them apart and move them into districts so that they no longer have a majority, or you pack them. You take as many of your opponents as you possibly can and you shove them into one district. So yeah, they're going to go ahead and be able to elect somebody in their one district, but not in any of the other places where they might otherwise have been. So it's cracking and packing. And that really became the plan of the Republican Party in 2010. So what happened is this. Reagan wins in 1980 and takes office in 1981 with this idea that you can cut taxes dramatically and still maintain services, because what he argued was that if you cut taxes, there would be such extraordinary investment, private investment in the economy, that the economy would grow hugely. And the taxes that remained on that economic growth would be enough to continue to power all the other ways that people wanted the government to act. And even when he talked about it, people thought it wasn't going to work. And if you're old enough to remember, the man who became his vice president, George H.W. Bush, called what he was talking about voodoo economics. That's what he meant. It's like, this doesn't work. This is voodoo economics. Well, in fact, it was voodoo economics. It's never actually worked. It never significantly goosed economic growth, and it never produced the kind of tax revenue it was supposed to. But it became sort of this article of faith among the Republicans that if you cut taxes, you were going to create economic growth that was going to make it possible to continue to have services, even though you weren't really getting, you weren't really taxing corporations and the very wealthy. And what's happened since 1981, between 1981 and 2021, more than $50 trillion moved from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. But the first set of tax cuts happens in 1981, and the Republicans want to do another major tax cut in 1986, and they're aware that Americans don't like the cuts to regulations and the cuts to social programs that have happened in the first of Reagan's terms. So in 1986, the Republican Party starts to manipulate the voters so that they can stay in power. And they're not hiding this. They talk about ballot integrity is what they talk about, but they also say that Democrats are cheating with voter fraud, that's how they're going to win, is through voter fraud. It's always been a rhetorical device. There really is, I keep making the point, there is almost no voter fraud in the United States of America. There has traditionally been a lot of election fraud, which is when you try and steal an election by manipulating the way it works. So beginning in 86, they start to talk about ballot integrity, and they start to talk about knocking Democratic voters off the rolls, primarily Black voters. And we have this because there was a lawsuit, and all the in the discovery showed their memos to each other talking about this. And then they quickly realize that what they're doing is not popular. And after Clinton gets elected in 92, because we have the George H.W. Bush presidency, and he says, dudes, we gotta stop cutting taxes because look at the deficits, which have tripled under Reagan. And the Clinton gets elected in 92. And in 93, the Democrats, through the Motor Voter Act, and make it easier to register to vote. And that really sends the radical Republicans sort of ballistic, saying they're planning to cheat, they're planning to cheat. And in 94, they accused two Democrats of a senator and a member of the House of Representatives of cheating in order to be elected. And they hold open these investigations to prove that there was voter fraud going on. And they never turn anything up, but they keep it in the news all the time. And that's where you really start to see that pattern of using investigations to seed the idea of malfeasance on the part of the Democrats, just to sort of, where there's smoke, there's fire. So we're going to keep this investigation going. But what happens is that you start to seed this idea. And then, of course, they impeach Clinton and expect that that's going to kill his candidacy, his presidency. And in fact, he's more powerful after the impeachment, more popular after the impeachment than he is before it. So anyway, they don't expect after the election of 2000, when you get George W. Bush, that Americans are ever going to go back to the Democrats, and they're really thinking that this is going to be a permanent Republican majority and so on. And then voters elect Barack Obama. And this is a crisis for the radical Republican Party in a number of different ways. But one of the ways in which it is a huge crisis is that they really thought they had a permanent lock on the presidency. And even to the point that, the George W. Bush in 2000 didn't win the majority of the popular vote, but they had the popular vote through the they had the Electoral College. It's very hot here. And that, of course, that election that gave the presidency to George W. Bush is thanks to Florida, where more than 1,000 people had been kicked off the rolls between 1998 and 2000, in addition to the hanging chads and so on and so forth. But anyway, Obama gets elected, and this is just a huge crisis. So Obama gets elected in 2008, takes office in 2009. And what the Republicans say then, and I keep emphasizing that these are not traditional Republicans. These are not George H.W. Bush Republicans, certainly not Eisenhower Republicans. These are the radicals who took over the party. In 2010, they go to their donors and they say, we can make sure that we continue to maintain control of Congress, even if we're going to lose the White House on occasion. And they do it through something called Operation Red Map. And that stands for, its operation is a normal kind of capitalization, but Red Map is all caps. And it stands for the Republican Redistricting Majority Project, Operation Red Map. And what they do is they make sure that the Republicans pour money into state legislatures in 2010. And this would be North Carolina and Michigan and Kansas and Ohio, and there's a lot of them. And what they do is North Carolina, did I say that one? They take those states that are purple states, and they guarantee that there is a Republican majority in the legislature for the 2010 redistricting. Because remember, according to the Constitution, we have a census every 10 years. And one of the things that census does is it enables the state legislatures to divvy up the state in districts, both for the Congress and for House, for state legislature seats, that will enable them to fairly represent the people in that state. So after 2010, Operation Red Map was in place in these states, and they put in place extraordinary gerrymanders. So states like North Carolina, which is really purple. North Carolina is just pretty much 50-50 of a state. The Republicans could get the vast majority of the seats because of redistricting. So it's a very long way to answer the idea that it was really 2010 when it goes off the charts, and it's been a long time sort of clawing that back in a number of states. But one of the things in those states is that nobody likes this except the people who get elected under it. Quite literally, even the Republicans who are advantaged by this, most of them don't want it either, because what it does is it means that in a district like Marjorie Taylor Greene's or Lauren Boebert's in Colorado, the people, those might be Republican districts for sure, but in the Republicans who live there don't want to be represented by a wacko. They want somebody who shares their principles. But when you have that extremely gerrymandered a district, what the lawmakers are afraid of is not that they will lose to a Democrat. They're worried they will lose to somebody more extreme than them because it is a Republican district. They are going to win. And so what it's done is it's dramatically pushed the Republican Party to the right. So what are you seeing right now? We redistrict every 10 years after the census. And right now, President Donald Trump is trying to get Texas to redistrict now in the middle of the decade in such a way that it will enable the Republicans to pick up 5 more seats, even though there hasn't been a new census or anything. This is purely a power grab. And for the first time, you are seeing Democratic governors saying, if you do that in Florida, I'm sorry, if you do that in Texas, we will do it in California, Illinois, and New York. And we're gonna get rid of everything you can accomplish with these gerrymanders. And I will point out that at least one of the gerrymanders that was in place in 2024, I'm confused about what year we're in, was illegal, was found to be illegal, and the courts let it stay in place until after the election. And without those gerrymanders in those states, the Republicans would not have control of the House of Representatives. So it matters. Senate's different, remember, because that's a statewide election. But the House of Representatives is really moved by the districting maps. All right, so that's maybe more than you wanted to know, but it is, I guess, somewhat interesting. All right, so I want to talk about something that nobody asked about because I think it matters. And it's been in my mind all day, and that's that I doubt you have seen this, or maybe you have, but today Trump's lawyers asked the court to demand that Rupert Murdoch testify in Trump's extraordinary case against Murdoch as the representative of the company that owns the Wall Street Journal for publishing the report that he had contributed to Epstein's birthday book for his 50th birthday that Ghislaine Maxwell put together. Now, the lawsuit itself, I've read it. The lawsuit itself is just over the top. It's like a press release. I think he's asking for some crazy amount of money, like I want to say $10 billion. I mean, it's almost kind of like a game. But the reason I bring up this is because this request today is because it was nasty, and nasty in a really interesting way, in that he literally says, we need to interview him really quickly. And of course, Trump's never going to go forward with this case because he would have to be part of discovery and all the stuff would come out. So this was really just, he said he's 94 years old. He's going to die. He's having these issues. We have to get him on tape immediately. And it was really interesting because it certainly reads as if he is simply harassing Rupert Murdoch, like a kid, like just being as nasty as he can be. And I thought that was a really interesting moment because one of the things that has always jumped out to me about Trump is that he has always been able to have someone cover for him. He always swaggers like he's the biggest kid on the block, and he's always poking somebody in the eye with a stick, right? But there's always been someone to make it okay. Lawyers to delay cases, his father to shore up his businesses. There's always been somebody who could make it okay. And this struck me as being him just lashing out again with the expectation that he can get away with anything because there's always somebody who's going to make it better. He's going to take care of it. Doesn't matter how he behaves because somebody else is going to make it better. And so he took on Rupert Murdoch, not in a lawsuit kind of way, which is, honestly, at that level that people are working on, I think they're probably suing each other all the time, but in sort of a nasty childhood bully kind of a way. And the trick here is that Rupert Murdoch has a lot more money than Donald Trump does. And I literally know nothing about where they got the information from the Wall Street Journal. And I will tell you, I have very little faith in the Wall Street Journal's editorial pages. Those are crackerjack reporters. And the editorial control, I mean, the people who oversee those articles, they nailed that down. There's just no way they would have put that in print without it being absolutely nailed down. And the reason that I mention that is because it struck me seeing that Trump poking it at two things struck me. One, that Trump is one of those guys who never has had to take the fallout for his decisions. There was always someone to fix it, a lawyer to play the law, or someone to throw money at the problem, or a divorce lawyer, or whatever. There was always somebody to fix things. It could always be fixed. And the fact that he is doing it now over the Epstein thing, and the fact that he did it in the way he did it, really highlighted for me two things. One, the pressure of the Epstein issue, but two, that he's out of control. I think he still thinks somebody is going to fix things for him. They're going to sweep in and fix things. And it's not looking real good, because he has taken on a number of different things that he is at odds with reality on. So, for example, this idea that his tariffs are bringing in all this money and everything's going to be great, literally is not how tariffs work. And there hasn't been some great trade success that he has done. And prices are going up. I saw somebody saying something the other day. Oh, look, prices are down. I'm like, I don't know where you're shopping, but the prices are going up across the board, and the tariffs haven't really even hit yet. They're supposed to hit on August 1st. And he took on tariffs, and he's taken on deportations, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. They're enormously unpopular, even among Republicans. So he keeps standing out there and saying, people love this. This was what they asked me to do. And that's simply not the case. So those were his two big things, the economy and the border. And they've blown up in his face, not with MAGA. MAGA still thinks he's great, but he's still sort of projecting, as he did with the stick in the eye to Murdoch, I can do this. I'm right. I'm the person who knows everything. I can do all this. And even though the Wall Street Journal, I mean, I don't know, it's probably never going to go to trial, but if I had to bet whether or not the Wall Street Journal's reporting was correct, I got to tell you, I would not hesitate to vote for rather than against the Wall Street Journal. So the fact that he's calling them a liar and being so nasty about it and all that, sort of like, I can make this reality change, just seemed to me to kind of represent him sort of saying that about tariffs. I can make economic reality change. About deportations, I can make the way people think about this change. I can make them believe things that are not true. And that snowballed for me today in a number of different ways. But he is increasingly incoherent. He is increasingly flailing over the Epstein thing. He is, this whole thing in Scotland where, people were just standing back looking at him like, what do we even say? He is the president of the United States of America, but he's incoherent. Is, I think, creating a specific kind of a crisis. And by that, I mean, he rose to power for as long and kept power for as long as he did, because no matter what he did, the Republican Party joined around him. He could always get the Republicans to get behind him because they did not want to cross his voters, because his voters were about the only reliable voters out there, those far right, hard right voters. There are other people who voted for him that are not that convinced. They thought he was better for one reason or another, but they're not necessarily permanent MAGA voters. But the Republican Party kept closing around him no matter what he did. because he could command these voters, and they turned out in really high numbers. I just looked the other day at the voting numbers for white evangelical Christians for Trump, and I think they voted for him 91%. I mean, it was huge. So what do you do if you're a Republican now and MAGA is splitting over the Epstein files? And the president, who has been able to command MAGA voters, is in trouble, physically and mentally, we know. What do you do? Well, you start to challenge him, and you're starting to see pushing back. So today, for example, the Navy was supposed to decommission a number of satellites that follow hurricanes. And there was such pushback against that. They changed their decision today. They're not going to take those satellites offline. And you're seeing this with senators who are saying, hand back the money that you have taken from the education department and hand back the money that you took from the NIH. Lots of ways in which they are willing to challenge him now that they weren't. So at the same time, you can see that happening, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. You can also see MAGA grabbing as much as they possibly can as quickly as they can. And this strikes me as being an extraordinarily dangerous time, because as you're starting to see protests kicking in, people saying, wait a minute, you can't do this. What about the fact that health insurance is the insurers are already requesting significant premium hikes because of the budget reconciliation bill. I think I've written about that a couple of times, so maybe I don't need to explain it, but there was in it a credit that made it easier for people who were sort of the working poor to afford to be in the marketplaces. The Republicans did not continue that, so that that subsidy is going to go away. And when it does, lots of people are not going to be able to afford their premiums. And so what that's going to mean is they're probably not going to get insurance, and those people who are left in the pools are going to have to pay more. So, you're starting to see this, and all of a sudden Republicans are saying, well, wait a minute, we need to change the law so we can include that tax credit. And people like Josh Hawley from Missouri are suddenly starting to say, hey, wait a minute, we should fix some of the stuff that was in that bill. So while you're seeing that on the one hand, you are also seeing the MAGAs grabbing everything they possibly can as quickly as they can, because they don't know what's going to happen next. And so you are seeing ICE, the enforcement, immigration and customs enforcement, really going whole hog. And you're seeing Holman out there, really, who is just an advisor to the president. He acts like he has authority, but he doesn't really. Out there talking about how they're throwing out criminals and so on. And they're really not. I mean, we know that at least 72% of the people, for example, who were on the planes were, had no criminal records, and that the vast majority of the people that they are arresting and holding in these detention centers without the opportunity for bail do not have criminal records. They're people who were undocumented or who overstayed their visas, and they're just keeping up their quota numbers by grabbing all these people and then going on TV and saying these are, rapists and murderers, and they're just not. And as that filters into the American population, people are getting angrier and angrier. But you're really seeing people like Holman and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, really pushing for more and more and more and more and more deportations while they still can, while the courts and while popular opinion is turning against them. But you're also starting to see really the bite down of the attempt of the people who wrote Project 2025, which has been behind so much of the Trump administration, trying to insert religion in as many places as they can. So there's a new rule this week out of the Office of Personnel Management that federal employees may pray on the job and can proselytize on the job, trying to, this is a quote, persuade others of the correctness of their own religious views. That was a no-go until this new rule because of the separation of church and state. Now they're saying that's okay. they're trying to push these different ways in which they're trying to establish this religious component into our government. But you're also seeing it with things like the pushback against the administration clawing money away from programs that Congress appropriated. You're seeing people like Russell Vogt, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, saying to Congress, who is saying, "Hey, toss over the money that we told you to spend," and saying, I got to review that. I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to ask for more rescissions because right now he's still in power. He's a very powerful man right now. He may not be in the future, so he's doing as much as he can there. And quite dramatically today, we have seen an attempt on the part of the administration to really dramatically slash regulations in the United States by going after the 2009 declaration that greenhouse gases that are causing climate change pose a threat to public health. And it's under that ruling that we have had most of the legislation for electric vehicles and so on since 2009. And they are trying to roll that back, trying to get rid of it. And what Lee Zeldin, who is the director of the EPA, has said is that this will be wonderful because it will get rid of $1 trillion in what he calls costly regulations, which will save more than $54 billion annually. But what he means by that is we will lose the protections that are at least starting to address the crisis of climate change, and that also protect public health in other ways as well, with the quality of our air and the quality of our water. And this, I think, takes me back to where I started with stuff I was going to talk about, that Trump's poking at Murdoch and being like, I can change the rules of the world because of who I am. I don't have to pay any consequences. It feels like this is what we're seeing on a national level. We can get rid of all the ways in which we need to address climate change, which, by the way, is extraordinarily real and dramatically threatens all of our lives in myriad ways. But I just did a presentation last night with a scientist about what climate change is doing to the lobster industry, which underpins Maine's economy. And you can't even argue. It's just there. It's just where the catch is change. Everything is changing, and to be able to say, well, we're going to get rid of all that because it's costing money to polluters and to the people who are trying to produce enough energy to do things like power the AI plants with fossil fuels, is, to me, that sort of short-sighted. I can change the rules because of who I am, but climate change is not going to do that. It's not going to say, oh, we're going to wait for a few years till we get a different administration. And that attitude, I guess I can't really wrap my head around it because I don't think that way. But it seems important to have it on the table that we are operating with an administration that believes it can deny reality, because those people don't appear to think that they're going to have to pay any consequences for their actions. But I'll tell you, living on the coast, we're already paying for the consequences of our inaction for the last 40 years on climate change. And we're bearing the least of it compared to places like Western North Carolina and Texas and California and the places that are affected by drought. And I'm only talking so far about the United States and the advent of new diseases and the loss of trees and all those sorts of things. And it does seem to me that we need, as a country, to articulate a new kind of way of looking at living in this country, where our goal is not to put money into rich people's pockets if they don't feel that they're going to have to deal with the consequences of their actions, and take a more holistic view of our future, so that we're not going to be sitting here where, well, whoever gets the benefits of the cuts in the EPA are putting money in their bank accounts, and we're sitting here losing our homes. And I've talked a lot about articulating new ways of what we want going forward, and I'm playing with how we do that. And we've got a lot of wonderful voices out there saying a lot of new, exciting things in new ways. Um, but I think it's up to us to talk about what it means to be a citizen of this country and to cooperate in such a way that we create a sustainable economic, physical, mental, environmental future for all of us, rather than simply saying, well, we'll make a few people really, really rich. And then I don't know what. I honestly don't know what comes on the other side of this for them. But I do know what comes on the other side of it for the rest of us. And I strongly would love for us to articulate a way that we can deal with these things that simply must be addressed. That whatever Trump says about the tariffs is not going to change the reality of how tariffs works. And whatever he says about the popularity of his attacks on undocumented migrants, it's not going to change the way we feel about them. And him saying that he can sue Rupert Murdoch for gazillions of dollars because of an article that the Wall Street Journal posted because Trump says it's a lie. I don't think he's going to change reality that way. And I know we're not going to change climate science by believing it doesn't exist. All right, so how is this playing out? Really interesting developments yesterday in the Carolinas, where in North Carolina, the very popular former Governor Roy Cooper, a Democrat, is running for the Senate seat of Tom Tillis, who was a Republican and decided not to run when Trump started attacking him for his opposition to the Medicaid cuts that were in the budget reconciliation bill. Really important seat for the Democrats, popular guy in that seat. Michael Whatley, who is the co-chair of the Republican National Committee, a hand-picked Trump supporter, is expected to step in to challenge Cooper. And the Republicans are already calling Cooper, who is very much a centrist, a far left candidate. And the other thing that was interesting, because here I think what you're seeing is the Democrats really articulating a vision for the future, for correcting the extremes of wealth we've had, for addressing the needs of a local state or of a state. And then in South Carolina, what happened there is that Paul Dans, who was one of the key architects of Project 2025, announced yesterday that he will be challenging Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who, as you know, is a very loyal Trump supporter, except there's light between them in a couple of places. And one of them is that Lindsey Graham does support Ukraine in the struggle between Ukraine and Russia's invasion to try and take over Ukraine. And Dans is characterizing Graham as a squishy moderate, which is so far right. Remember, this is a key architect of Project 2025. What we are really seeing in those two contests is a struggle over the future of the political systems, although there's state variations and all that. That while the Democrats are running somebody who's very popular, is talking about reinforcing Medicaid, making it possible for small businesses to survive in a way that they can't right now, and so on. And on the other hand, you have a Project 2025 candidate who says that anything other than his way, which when people know about it, about 4% of Americans like Project 2025. Anybody who doesn't do it his way is a squishy moderate. And Gans said in his announcement that this was the election where MAGA would either be broken or reformed as the kind of people that he is. Somebody, Project 2025, destroy the federal government, all the things that you're seeing happening now that are so enormously unpopular. So we're kind of getting an early view of what the race in 2026 is going to look like. All right, so that was probably more than you were looking for, but somebody did ask a question. I want to leave you on a good note. How do you not get overwhelmed with everything that's going on? So on this one, I can help. I mean, I always say pick your lane, take a break, and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is, not a lot. Famous last words. I shouldn't say this because oh my God, but not a lot usually happens in August. So like today, I gave you most of the huge stuff. There's big major stories like voter suppression and that kind of stuff I'm following, but a lot of the stuff that people are showing you flashing red lights, it's not going to be in the history books. It's really just not. And that might be one way to look at the news. I did my usual this morning, looked at a lot of the stories, and yeah, some were interesting to me in particular, but there were none that I felt couldn't wait another day. That you hadn't heard before. I probably won't write tonight. We'll see. It's actually the anniversary of Bacon's Rebellion, which I'm really tempted to write about, which has nothing to do with the present. But if you need to take some time, August is the month to do it. We're going to hit the ground hard in September and October, and it's okay to look away and to enjoy the weather and to take some time right now, but I do maintain that with the extreme instability in the White House, the extreme instability in the Republican Party, the extreme instability in the country at large, and the instability in the Democratic Party as it decides which way to move going forward, now is the time to speak up on whatever you care about. Doesn't have to be politics, doesn't have to be gerrymandering, although that's going to be my big thing going forward. Speak up. Talk to local people, talk to your friends, talk to state officers, talk to anybody you can find about the things that matter to you, because we are going to have to articulate a new country when we come out of the ruins of this. And crucially, I think a new idea of how one behaves in the United States of America. If you think about the old biographies of George Washington, they were literally designed at the beginning of this country to help to inform people how to behave in a democracy. And I think sort of from the 1980s and maybe before that, the idea was that the way you behaved in democracy was you grabbed as much for yourself and your families as you could. I don't think that's done us very well. I think we're going to have to articulate a new kind of what it means to be an American. And that is a really exciting project, I think, because it will make us redefine ourselves and redefine what we want the government to do as it represents us. So speak up, take the time you need, but also speak up and get involved in the things you care about. August is a, we're not there yet. We're almost there. August is like for me, it's always sort of the end of the year. And the fall is when the year begins again. And, it ends and begins again. I know it's off schedule for people who, unless you're of the Jewish faith, but it's always felt that way to me because you take it easy, it's hot, and then you hit the ground running when the semester starts. And that's certainly what I plan to do. So try not to get overwhelmed, but do keep speaking up because this is not the time to be quiet. Everything is going to be hitting the fan in the next 3 months. So anyway, thank you for being here, and I will see you soon. I got some stuff up my sleeve. You'll hear more about it soon. Thanks for being here.